For the moment, it's very much a welcome. Everybody wishes to use the guest Wi-Fi. The SSID is Swindon Tree, and it's Dream Shine Level, all one word, all lowercase, as the password. It's Dream Shine Level. We've got a few apologies for absence tonight, so I'll ask officers to confirm, please.
We've had apologies from councillors Davis, Shake, the Coit Grimmy chair. We've got councillors Butcher and Milner Barry deputising.
Thank you. You can see that Councillor Butcher is here at the moment, so we'll welcome him when he arrives. Declarations of interest is item 2. So we remind members at the start of every meeting that if any topic as you go through and you believe you need to make a personal or professional interest, please indicate either now or during the conversation in the relevant agenda item. Are there any members who wish to declare any interests? Councillor Hopkins.
Yes, I should declare, although it's not prejudicial to this, that I'm a member of the board of directors of a management company and I'm a shareholder in other management companies, which are on leasehold developments.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? I will declare a personal interest, that's not prejudicial, because I'm a resident of Abbey Farm, which is currently in that adoption aspect. I've purposely stayed away from political issues as a councillor, even though I've never lived there. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to item 3, which is minutes, and it's the last 2 meetings. So we've got minutes from the 1st of April and the 28th of April. Those circulated ahead of time. I'm not aware of any questions from members around their accuracy, so I will look around the room and see if anybody does wish to comment on it. If not, we will move to the vote on I'm happy to adopt both sets of minutes. That is unanimous, thank you. Moving quickly on to item 4, which is public question time. So do we have any members of the public who would like to ask questions of the committee on tonight's agenda items or anything else from the council? I can see there's 4 indications. So we'll start at the front and move to the back. If you'd like to come to the table, please. There is a couple of spare chairs. And you want to turn the microphone on and for the record confirm your name and ask your question. Where we can, we'll try to answer questions or direct them to the relevant person. If we're not able to, we'll ensure through committee services that you have a written response.
Thank you. I have more than one question. But please stop me.
That's fine. We have 15 minutes normally at the start of every meeting, so I'm happy to kind of use some discretion as long as they're relevant and short. It's not an opportunity to make a speech.
Right, my name is Peter Eves, and I live in a development management company that has not received its final S106 completion certificate. Will the council consider adopting the public open spaces on Bakery Park before the final Section 106 degree completion certificate is signed off? Okay. Why have the council allowed the developers to charge residents for their estate fees before the Section 106 has been signed off? How can the council ensure that residents are not left with the liability and cost for maintaining the suds on Bakery Park? How can the council ensure that the developers do not hand over the management company to residents before resolving all the snagging issues and completing the necessary legal documents? Who is responsible for the sud proposed if the council highways have adopted the rules but Thames Water no longer adopt the suds? Will the committee consider looking into the House of Commons public amenities debate to get local authorities and councils to adopt and take ownership of the public open spaces? Will the committee consider looking at the Competition and Markets Authority's final report in 24, which state that councils should have a legal duty to adopt the public open spaces in developments? Why are there 2 parish councils on Bakery Park paying 2 different precepts? Why are developers allowed to withhold their landscape and snagging list for residents before the land is transferred into the management company? Who is responsible for maintaining the public open footpaths on land under a management company? can the committee ensure that the council and the developers follow the Section 106 agreement before the land is transferred into the management company? And lastly, will the committee support Badley Park's previous request in 2016 of becoming a non-parish under the community governance review? Thank you.
Thank you. There's quite a few questions there. That's what I'm about to say. Is you've read out into the record quite a few of those. Do you have a copy of them to hand?
Yes, I can give it.
And if you can send them on to committee services with Sean,
Or Neil as well.
with Neil, can forward it on to committee services. We'll make sure that it is put into public record, and we'll follow it up in due course.
Thank you.
Okay. The next gentleman next to you.
Thank you.
There we go. Can you hear me? Thank you. I thought I was going to be on that one, but I wasn't. So there's only one question you'll be happy about. Why did Swindon Borough Council allow a bus route?
Sorry, if you could confirm your name.
Oh, sorry, it's Brian Robinson. I'm a resident of Badbury Park, Biddiston Avenue. Why did Swindon Borough Council allow a bus route through Biddiston Avenue, Badbury Park, when it was in breach of manual for streets, as the road is below the minimum width to have a bus route? That was in a nutshell. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. In a similar kind of way, I'm not sure we can answer that today, a specific case, but we'll make sure it's followed up shortly. The next row back.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Zach Corson, resident of Badbury Park. Having spoken to others in the residents working group, there seems to be, as you just see, a lack of information relating to issues of ongoing maintenance, expenditures and adoption of services by the management company. Can the council or the committee facilitate a forum between residents, management company, developers and council officers so these matters can be clarified? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll certainly take that idea forward into the main discussion that we have as a committee and see where we stand. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, back row next.
Thank you. Is my microphone on?
No, you're going to press the button in the middle.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. My name is Joe Tompkinson. You may know me by name after you received an email from me yesterday evening introducing two other letters that have been sent very publicly in relation to what many would describe as a scandal on Abbey Farm, and what many would say is council complicity in that scandal. Since the 8th of July planning meeting, in which serious governance failures were identified, I have no response whatsoever from the monitoring officer.
Sorry, could you just be careful about what you say in terms of officers and members in this forum? It should be questions.
Of course, if you're happy, I'll just provide a summary of where the question comes from. If I need to rephrase anything, I'm quite happy to. I have no contact, residents have no contact at all following formal complaints from the monitoring officer. There were concerns raised that there was an apparent appetite to rush through a planning decision and issue that as quickly as possible to the developers. I won't rehearse all of the points raised in either of those letters, but what we are left with on Abbey Farm is an outright failure for anybody to even acknowledge the issue. I'll pause again, sorry. I didn't know if you wanted to pause.
No, we will just come back to the legal officer shortly.
Sure, thank you. The issue we have is that there is no scrutiny of that decision, and it is feared very strongly by all of us involved that whilst there is no contact from the council, we are very unsure of their motives and what's going on behind the scenes. So I've asked for the matter to be called in for scrutiny. That's been completely ignored. There's been no response. I have identified in those letters what I believe are serious concerns in respect of the conduct of that meeting and the way that it was held. I ask of you as a scrutiny committee, is it your intention to scrutinise that meeting and investigate the conduct of those who concerns have been raised with? And if that is not your intention, I would like to ask why it's not, please. I do have a number of other questions which I'm happy to ask, but that's fine.
We can ask that initial one now, but I would like to be careful in terms of what your language and what you say about everything. The first one is that planning applications, once they're approved, cannot be scrutinised in the way that you're envisaging. It is not the scope of this committee or any committee in the council that can do that, and that is a legal aspect as much as anything else. So even if you want to, I'll ask the Chief Legal Officer to just respond initially to your next point.
Thank you, Chair. Any correspondence that I have received as monitoring officer will be responded to in the appropriate manner to the gentleman. Any matters that he's referencing in relation to potential legal action or otherwise will be responded to in the appropriate manner. And any issues relating to alleged member conduct will also be dealt with in the appropriate manner, and that is at this committee.
Ask you other questions?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, I would just like to state, I apologise, I don't know everybody's faces, and I wasn't aware, Chair, that Ms. Hall was present. I apologise for that oversight. I didn't wish to speak about you as though you weren't here, albeit I appreciate having to address the Chair. I think realistically, you're aware that we're now at the stage of proceedings because we have tried all attempts to escalate through the correct channels. I take the committee at their word that this is that we're here to actually scrutinise something. I am bemused to find that we just have state after state, development after development across Swindon that just has the same issues, and it's just gone on for so long. I implore you to use whatever powers you have to properly scrutinise what has gone on, explore these relationships between developer and council, and give the public back its confidence in the function that this council is here to achieve. I think that's very important, and I would ask you as councillors to take that away with you. That's the end of my questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just on that last point then, hopefully that is going to be one of the key things out of today's session, is to have that open conversation and see what we can improve and what root causes touching, because it's an issue across the state, all across the town. And also, Swindon is a growing town, so we don't want to see these things in the future.
I do have one question, which I will ask before I leave you. What we've seen is just a real tendency, and I'm happy to be on record to say this because I can provide all the documentation you might require, to just obfuscate and avoid and close down and mislead. And I am concerned of the power that this committee has to really get to the root of the issue. I'm reassured by what you say, but also as residents, I think you really need to acknowledge that we feel that much of this is pay lip service, because instantly, from the moment raising concerns were deflected, from a level 1 complaint were deflected. As you'll know from my letter, a response was made very hastily and prematurely to a level 2 response, to simply direct us towards the Ombudsman. And that isn't what level 1 or level 2, that isn't what a complaint system is not designed to be there for.
So I probably can't go into those specifics short on this session, but I'll ask the Lisa's Chief Legal Officer to comment again.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's really important for scrutiny to deal with the matters before it's on the agenda today, and to take public questions in the spirit with which they're intended. I also think it's really important for members to note that the views that you are hearing and the comments that are being made by Mr. Tompkinson are his view, and it's really important for that to be noted for the committee.
Thank you.
Yes, I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who want to say anything? If not, thank you all for your attendance and public questions. We'll ensure that you have written responses where we've not been able to answer them. Therefore, we'll close public questions. In fact, it is 5:15, so we're keeping to time. The next item is item 5, which is on the topic of housing developers and management companies. Now, over the last year, the committee has tried to take a more thematic approach in how it approaches topics, and we've had 2 really good evenings with Thames Water about a variety of topics, which will also be followed up on, including on our standing item on the work programme. 2 meetings ago, the committee agreed that this was an area that we needed to investigate further, and in particular, are there ways in which we can or should improve internal council processes, and all that kind of comes into it. The agenda report kind of covers 3 key areas that the committee identified and that myself and the deputy chair of the committee have spoken about. And we also had an initial pre-meeting with some of the attendees tonight, just to make sure they were properly briefed on where we were hoping to see where those conversations go. I've certainly got no predetermined idea of what recommendations might be, and hopefully everyone's coming forward with a keen open mind. We've all got our thoughts on these topics, but I would ask that everybody tries to keep things fairly neutral. We can use local examples where appropriate, but we should be trying at a slightly higher level than that. And I would like to see some open frank conversations. Hopefully we can have some recommendations that kind of come out of tonight's session, and we will probably have a follow-up with council officers once they've kind of digested that as well. The key thing is that we can talk in this room while it is recorded, and we need to be careful. I would hope that we don't all turn around and say it's all hunky-dory, there are no issues that don't need to be addressed, which has happened in the past when we had, for instance, the police scrutiny session. So we want to see some key things coming out of it. It is not to stand here or sit here tonight and just talk to ourselves and say it's fine. We really want to get to the root causes of the role of developers in estate management, how we can establish improved relations with management companies, council engagement, and how we can improve the adoption process, and a variety of things like that. So it's very much for the committee to ask questions and be guided, but it is an open conversation with everybody around the table tonight to see where we get to. And honestly, thank you for our attendees tonight in coming along. It is with that spirit of collaboration is what we're doing it for, rather than to put you on the spot and see where we go. So that's not the intention, but if there's anything you can't answer, please do make a note, and committee search as well, and we'll follow up outside the meeting. So, with all that said, as chair, I think it'd be useful just to go around the room very quickly and just indicate who are councillors and which area we represent, and then for our attendees tonight to also give their name and the company they kind of represent, so that we can see who attends. So I will start and say I'm Councillor Delvina, I represent Coffin and Dorcan. Should we go to Sean?
Sean Vance, Committee Member Services.
Neil Hopkins, I represent Chisholm and Lawn, which incidentally includes Bradbury Park.
I'm Rebecca Bengen and I represent Vivian Freshberg.
Hi, Councillor Tom Butcher, I represent Stratford Market and South Marston. I am substituting, sorry, for Councillor Sorry.
Good evening all, my name is Rebecca Wilson and I represent Wick.
Hello everyone, my name is Abdul Amin and I represent Walpole Apartments.
I'm Jane Mulberry, I represent Oldtown East Whitehall and I'm subbing for
Councillor Davis.
Councillor Davis, thank you.
Darren Ryan, also here from St Leonard's Sussex.
I'm Michael Hean, I'm the adoptions manager for Vistry Cotswolds.
Rob Miracle, representing Vistry Cotswolds.
Charlie Joseph from Preston Nicholson South. Jackie Chalmers from Preston Nicholson South West.
I'm Nigel Billingham, I'm representing Residents First CIC.
My name's Daniel, I'm a borough councillor for St Andrews wards, chiefly with Tadpole and Abbey Farm, which are areas of concern for many people, which is what we're talking about tonight.
Gary Sumner, I'm the councillor for the Ridgeway ward, which includes about half the communities and villages, so many years ahead of correspondence with management companies and developers.
Hello, I'm Lisa Hall, Council's Chief Legal Officer.
So, welcome everybody. I'm going to open the first question up to our guests tonight, and very much towards an open point of what do you understand as the key situation in Swindon in your respective developments, and where do you think the council could improve matters? It could be, it is an open question, so it's very much your perspective of where you think that we should put attention. Should we start with judgments from Simon?
Yeah, I think one of the key points we discussed through the survey is there's a bit of disparity between what's approved for planning and then what's either adoptable or unadoptable from a house perspective, which then does lead on to delays with other things. So we've got experience of that where we've gone to get all of our site adopted, and highways then say, well, you've got that approved for planning, but that doesn't get pass our highway test, and therefore we now can't get it adopted. So that's a failure through. Yeah, obviously there is an element of that that's our responsibility to make sure we comply with the standards, but when standards change regularly and the local developers aren't given those standards regularly, things ultimately change to the point where it's not just picked up, and then other things through that planning process essentially change what's required, and that changes the format of the highways. So that's one point we picked up as quite key. Could be done better.
Looking at history.
I'd probably echo much of what Darren's just said there in terms of changes, and don't think they're intended to cause conflict, but they do end up causing conflict with regard to behaviours and adoption and so on. And that can lead to delays, certainly for those that are not visible through that particular part of the issue. Next side of that, there's areas that develop themselves undoubtedly, and I'm here to chat through that with you.
Yeah, that was on my list as well, the changes. Also, once we've got standards to get complete, the changes that then occur, whether it be a change of style, and it's not a written format of exactly what needs to be done, different, so local authorities around the country will have different standards. So if there was a national, I would talk about Swindon here, but again, standards that change across different developments for us. Again, engagement with technical approval and things like 38, if we can get those approved earlier, we can obviously get things completed earlier and handed over earlier as well. Again, I know we talked about maintenance on developments, but where we've got verges on spine roads and highways, could that be separated from the final adoption? Could they get handed over at a different point in time? This is another good thing that perhaps could improve the environment.
Okay, and a slightly different perspective for residents first, which is the management company itself, but from your side.
Yes, so I'm independent. I provide support to residents who typically complain about developers, and there's no offence, so apologies for that. Point of question about the scope of what we're talking about. Obviously, start talking about S38s and road adoption highways and all that sort of stuff. Is the focus of this more to do with management companies? Because that clearly isn't related to highways. So it's worth just clarifying that.
I think it's both, partly because as developments are built, management companies are set up, but usually the directors of the developers who appoint or are management company, and once it's adopted, management companies hand it over to residents. So you've got examples of where management codes could be in place for 10 years, run by the developers, before it's handed over. So it's that whole piece is what we're specifically looking at.
But I guess highways don't generally get handed over to management companies. I suppose that was my question.
If I could just reply to that, our policy in this is until we've got adoption, we don't transfer the title to the land, to the management company. And where the options are drawn out, then I can understand that.
So we're trying to get to the root cause of those and how can we improve matters in the future. So it's not 10 years, it might be 2 years, or what's good practice. So,
But could I make a suggestion?
please.
So it might make sense for us to follow the life cycle of an estate. So I've got a handout that shows typically what I've seen. So I'm providing support for over 100 estates now in the last 12 months. So I've built a picture of all of the issues that residents tend to see during the life cycle of estates, starting from an approved planning application right the way through to handover. Is that appropriate?
Please do.
Well, I've got plenty. There we go. I'm also conscious that I've got a lot of notes, right? And I don't really want to hold the book. I appreciate. Developers will not necessarily agree with everything, but in the spirit of open discussion, it's probably worth just getting it out. And so if it's okay,
Excuse me, Chair, can I ask Mr. Billingham to forward us an electronic copy of that so it can be put on the website? Thank you.
Yeah. And just make sure the last issue copies. So, looks like there are, but not back. Can we further spare copies?
Yes, Dr. Blue. Yeah.
I think just hand them to the residents at the back there in turn as well.
Thank you. So if we, is it okay if I just start? Is it okay if I just start talking you through this and then perhaps I'll initiate some discussion?
I'll just say, we'll keep trying to keep it succinct and to the point, and we'll see where the conversations go on with this. I'd rather not be here for 3 hours plus, so it's in everyone's interest we kind of get to the key points, please.
So this diagram just shows the timeline, left to right, with the middle grey box. And we've got some key milestones. There are 9 key milestones above the line, and then a number of generic sort of activities below the line. So if we just start with milestone number 1, planning application approved. Just a quick point prior to that, clearly the S106 is the key document that needs to be approved from a management company perspective and a resident perspective. It's got all the obligations in it. I think the key point here to highlight is if Swindon Borough Council get that right and the clauses are really tight, we don't see any issues beyond the planning application. Right? All the issues that I'm going to talk about today will disappear. All right, so I suppose that's just a point about getting the planning right around S106 legal agreements. So at milestone 1, the first question is about, is an adoption by the local authority an option in that S106? Okay. And the S106, I've checked over 70 S106s in the past year, and the vast majority have an option which the developer chooses whether to provide that option or not. Right, it's not a mandatory option, it's the developer chosen option. And it's worth probably just talking through what the significance of that is. So in the examples that I've seen, if you've got 2 options, either adopt by the local authority or send it through to a management company, there's a significant amount of money that actually either costs the developer or saves the developer and is passed on to residents. And we've already heard examples today where what we call the premature transfer of maintenance responsibility actually turns into a cost to the resident, right? So this is where open space is constructed by the developer. It doesn't necessarily go through inspection. It doesn't go through anything further beyond that, so maintenance or transfer to the management company. But the developer transfers responsibility for maintenance to the management company early, where the residents have no control over it, and the residents start getting bills. Now, from my perspective, that doesn't seem fair.
right? So if that was, we switched it, we didn't take it to the management company, we allowed the local authority to adopt, that would not even be considered. Because a local authority would hold on as long as they possibly could to make sure the quality of the open space was right up there, it met all the standards. Right, so in one situation, the developer would incur a significant cost if they were going down the adoption route. If they transfer it to the management company, they save a significant amount of money. So is that worth a discussion point?
Yes. If you want to carry on through what you'd like to say to start with, and then we'll kind of go back to key points of this.
Fair enough, right, so that's the first point. If we move on to point 2, so milestone 2, that's macro established managing agent. I don't think there's anything desperately exciting about this one, other than the fact that there are clearly strategic partnerships between developers and managing agents that where developers help managing agents to generate revenues, the revenue stream, in my opinion, I appreciate that people may have a different opinion about that, and managing agents help developers save money. All right, and that's specifically around that point about transferring maintenance responsibility early. Other than that, at that point in time, the managing agent is not doing a great deal. All they're doing is looking after the management company, make sure the company filings are done. That's it. Okay. Milestone 3, first homeowners move in. That's quite significant in the context of it starts a potential revenue stream for a managing agent. And just a quick point that you didn't include managing agent in your list of stakeholders, but I think it's important to take that into consideration. I think the key thing here is that the money that a resident pays as part of their completion process, so they pay a pro rata amount into the management company's funds, so that the management company is in a good financial position when they take over responsibility for maintenance. What they find is actually that money isn't specifically used for that. It's eaten up before they get to that point. So typically, the managing agent charges a fee for registering them, up to about 150 quid. And then some managing agents even charge residents during the period where the developer is responsible for the open space. They charge them a minimum amount of money every year just to keep things running, when actually they've really got no responsibility for the open space in any shape or form. So again, that's just eating away at the money that residents actually end up paying for maintenance when it's not their responsibility. At the same point, or obviously shortly after, residents start wanting to move home, they end up having to pay a managing agent between 450 and 650 quid for a management information pack, which realistically costs about £25 to create. We also quite often are forced into paying £500 for a deed of variation in support of mortgage providers, where they want to get first protection over the property if the homeowner falls into debt with the management company, so i.e. not paying service charge fees. Okay, so that's homeowners start moving in. We then get perhaps the most contentious one, so what we call premature estate service transfer, or PES. So effectively, this is where we just briefly talked about already, where the developers constructed open space to an extent. They haven't bothered going through construction at that point, but they feel confident enough to try and hand over responsibility for maintenance to the management company. And at that point, residents start paying. I think one of the key things to also highlight at this point is there's a classic conflict of interest here where the developer wants to get rid of the responsibility for maintenance. The management company that's also controlled by the developer is more than happy to accept it without any due diligence or superficial due diligence, in my opinion. And that goes against all the responsibilities of a director to protect the interests of A, the management company, and B, the members that are a member of that management company. Yeah, so that's a fundamental concern, I would suggest. And I think the key reason why that happens is that, unfortunately, local planning authorities do not insist on following a clear chain of events which in any other industry, and if you were following the adoption route, would be followed: construction, inspection, remedial actions, certification, some sort of maintenance period. Then you do your transfer, and then as soon as Magneco has got that land, then they can start covering the cost of maintenance. So because the local planning authority does not insist on following that process, developers potentially get away with some unusual behaviour, shall we just say. Okay?
We should be careful in what we say. And it's your opinion on this. But
It is my opinion. I accept that completely. Okay? Then we're moving on to service charge bills. So that just naturally follows on. I mean, I think the key thing here, this is actually where residents really start asking questions. They've got the first bill through the door and they think, well, what on earth is this about? Why are we paying? What are we paying for? Why are we paying now? Because actually the open space hasn't been finished. And that's when they start reaching out to organisations like Residents First to ask for help. Is this right? Should we be doing something about it? And they also start asking the question about, well, actually, why are we paying a service charge fee if we're already paying council tax, which addresses another one of the points that need to be discussed. So that's milestone 5. Milestone 6, final homeowners move in. Now, in theory, at this point, there is no reason why the developer should not release control of the management company and allow residents to take control of it. This is all about control of the management company. As soon as residents take control of the management company, they have control over the quality of maintenance, the price they pay, and the subcontractors they use. Up until that point, they are forced, they're effectively in a leasehold situation. They have no control over everything, anything, and they have to pay whatever they choose.
you need to be careful what you're going to say.
Apologies.
I can't keep on reminding you.
Apologies. So that's where we act with that. So we really need to make sure developers release control of the management company. I think generally, I think we've heard it already, that they like to wait until all the adoptions work is complete. I think that's an overly cautious approach, and it impacts residents directly. Milestones 7 and 8. Yes, so once we've got final adoption complete, development is deemed complete, we can then obviously be thinking about getting an EGM organised. Now, typically within the Articles of Association, there tends to be up to 3 conditions. Those conditions are basically all houses that need to be sold. Quite often they have the development work is all complete on the estate, which ties in for the adoptions. And then the final point is that the developer needs to issue a notice to say it's all complete. And again, that just pushes the time out beyond the point at which residents really should be in control of the management company. And then we finally get the EGM being held and residents can take control. And they would naturally take the right actions to ensure their service charge bills are as low as possible and the quality of maintenance as high as possible. I guess that's probably as much as I need to talk through at this point, if that's okay.
There's a lot to digest on that as we're going to go through it. Again, remind everybody to be careful in how they talk about individuals, companies, and the like, because it's not necessarily an easy ability to do the right reply and it is not just anything. So, having said that, I think it's a good way to help kind of focus some of these conversations. I guess my first one, before I'm bringing in Councillor Sumner, who's indicated, for the developers, I guess it's a bit of background around the use of management companies. It used to be for apartment blocks and shared spaces, and now it's branched out to general estate maintenance and ongoing, where you've got parishes and councils or unitary. So from your perspective, why do you kind of use management companies as kind of by default these days, rather than rely on the existing authorities like parishes and councils? Let's start with Simon.
Okay, thank you for those questions. It's quite a lot to take in, as you say.
I suppose in section 106, it comes down to what's in that section 106, and every section 106 is specific to each development and how each council sets it out. And I think from a pursuant perspective, we would wholly agree with the principle that everything should be adopted. And yes, it might cost more with community funds and things like that, but if that's what's necessary, that should be the preference. If there's a choice, then it could well end up being that a residence management company is more appropriate. It's really down to how it starts and what the letter of the law is in that section 6. So there's the options. It's quite often historically would be down to viability pressures. For us now, if we can get things adopted, that's what's appropriate.
Bishop?
I suppose we've had both cases, we've had stipulations where parish can get first choice, district council second choice, Manco would be the third choice, and we've had instances where the parish took that up, and that process went quite well. We've been in situations where parish was supposed to take on spaces, and then at the end turned it down. So yeah, we left the other situation. The reason we hold off title transfer until adoption is should we need to get adoption to take some of the land back. If we've got no control over it, then that's causes us quite big issues.
Okay.
It's important to say that we probably agree with you that it sounds idyllic, and as a developer, we find ourselves, well, I can speak for myself, in a situation where we're stuck in a bit of a cycle. We would love to have the last property. Sorry, I'll lead in. We would love to complete the last property and look to hand that over to the residents as soon as possible. The back end issue, predominantly with adoptions, does slow that down. And I do agree with you that it's far from ideal for residents on that side being able to have that control over their own development. So that's what we're leading, we really do push to. In terms of why we need to have management companies to especially manage the open space is, like we've spoken about, what's in the 106, and where I'm not in Swindon but in other local authorities not being able to transfer that over at point of sale, we tell residents one thing and that changes along the route, which then puts us in breach of the code, etc. So if we have a management company, we know which way it's going to go and we have that control, so we're not misleading any residents during that sales process. And also if we are to transfer over to adopt to the local authority, which again would be a preference, at what point and the timescale set out to do that, again from a company point of view, to have that reassurance that at point of installation it follows a process that we have the reassurance at the end that it will get transferred.
Just in terms of do the developers here positively try and transfer maintenance responsibility to management companies prior to the formal transfer?
We do partial transfer, but we're doing it, and again, learning from past experience, we're now getting a group of residents to be involved in that transfer process and having a formal sign. So I think you mentioned that didn't happen previously, and for examples where that hasn't happened, but that's a step that we're putting in place to make sure that what we're transferring over is completely in line with that.
Just one follow-up.
It's not really an opportunity to ask questions to everybody, but certainly
Fair enough. Can I make a statement?
Very quick one.
So I think the simple answer to this is if developers keep hold of responsibility for maintenance right the way through to the end, residents don't have a problem. Yeah, that's the easy answer.
Against history
At a certain stage, when we feel that the public open space is substantially complete, we bring in the management company up until that point. The area's been, the landscaping's been put in, it's maintained. Residents don't have any costs during that period, which can be quite a long period depending on the nature of development. The other issue is quite often on a development, we end up building or using a public open space because it should be somewhere for a compound, for storing materials, etc. So sometimes that goes quite late. But yeah, I can understand residents being over the moon if they didn't have the air service.
Okay, Simon?
I mean, our general approach, it varies slightly on bigger sites because you get a bit more of a transition of something that's going to hand over and bits afterwards. But generally speaking, we charge that initial service charge that you referred to. So the question you raised, where that normally goes to. But generally, we'll charge that, then we'll keep the maintenance under our control completely until the development's finished. And then we're looking to hand it over at that stage because it's in our interest to keep the environment as upgoing as we can. It's, otherwise, you end up with contractors damaging things and who's done this, who's done that, and repairing things. It's in our interest as much as the residents. But ultimately, we do want to hand over the good, well landscaped, well looked after development. Quite frankly, as soon as we can once we've sold our homes.
Thank you. I'll bring in other councillors to ask questions now. My final one before I can do that, and I've had experiences myself in my capacity as a councillor of a developer refusing to engage with a councillor to represent residents, and the developer to say get the residents to talk to customer services. So it's kind of that kind of disconnect. Are you kind of happy as companies to meet with members outside of this meeting so that if there are specifics around estate management or adoption or anything like that, that you're happy to kind of get together and address that? So something Simon coming around.
Yeah, I think ultimately we are. There's specific councillors want to contact us. Yeah, I think we are.
Thank you.
Depends on specific, but.
I'd say yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I think.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I've got councillors Sumner, Butcher, Adams, and Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. So, in terms of my experience of this, and I was a cabinet member for planning when we held the council, so long history with news and villages and other developments. I think what I've seen is, you know, as the gentleman said, Section 106 agreements are locked into place. The reason that developers, you know, local authorities like Swindon don't want the maintenance responsibility of a lot of the new developments is because they involve special features like certs, which are going to be very, very expensive to maintain over the years. You know, particularly sort of years 10 to 15, you know, the costs start to ramp up. And I know some of the smaller parish councils like South Marsden at one point looked at liaising with developers about whether or not they could take on responsibility as a parish council, but in the end they weren't really equipped for that. So I think in the interim, it's about communication. And as the Chair has just said, I think it would be welcomed if, you know, my experience as of now is that I've got Redlands Grove going up in Wanborough, and about 150 residents living there so far. They've just been introduced very recently to the management company. But yeah, a lot of the primary responsibilities are still with the developer. So the residents don't have a great communication channel in terms of they have to pop into the show home, which is not really the appropriate setting for residents to be raising issues with developers about what may or may not have gone wrong. So I think that is a communication thing which could be easily resolved. With the management company, again, yeah, they've been given some information, but they still want to know who's doing what and when and who's responsible for this. So yeah, they're looking at things like roadside swales, which are going to be adopted by the local authority once the road is adopted, but in the meantime, they'd like to look at them. So again, it would be welcome if there was a channel of communication. In terms of how developments proceed, it's also, I think, one of the big anxieties for residents is they go to the show home, they're sold a lovely new village environment, and many of my residents of Redlands Grove fantastically love their new village. They really feel good about it, so they don't want to go out publicly and say bad things. But they were sold the idea of school in the new village. This is not the developer's responsibility. This is something where the funding's been pulled at the moment, so they're not going to get a primary school yet. And they've got a play area, which is currently, I think the gentleman mentioned a short while ago, occupied by a compound. So at the end of phase one, there was going to be a play area. they've now started on phase 2 and the compound is still on phase 1. So residents get disappointed about that. They're now paying a service charge to a company. They've not necessarily got facilities that they were buying into, which from the developer's point of view, at some point, that's going to be a negative because people will come out there and say, look, I've been living here 2 years now, 3 years, my kids have got nowhere to play. So it's something to look in terms of phasing. Yeah, if you could give the residents a phasing plan, I was given a phasing plan by Bellway at the outset. That's not being lived up to, so the residents don't have what they were expecting. And then in terms of Badbury Park, that's part of Badbury Park is still within my ward. Obviously, you've got sort of boundary changes going ahead, but I can understand why that's been difficult. I have a fantastic relationship with Julie Roper, but for Persimmon, that road is currently not typically at Homington because it's the construction route to the final 300 homes. Again, I think perhaps there is a communication piece, whether this is for the council, of residents understanding why they buy into. It's explained by their solicitor in that fleeting moment when they're all excited and they're signing a contract, and it's gone completely over their heads why they're now paying a parish council precept, and they're paying a management company service charge, and they're paying their council taxes from the borough council. They don't know why that happened, and then that gets people, like some of the residents here tonight, quite angry because they've overlooked it. Most people have overlooked it. And parishes, again, it's very difficult for them because we're talking about on the agenda tonight about the relationship with parishes. I'm a parish councillor in Wanborough. I attend various other parish council meetings. Lidington, they've got 140 residents in the village. There's 140 odd residents at Badbury Park, but they don't know what they can do for them. They collect a precept now, but everything's management company in Badbury Park. So short of putting up a parish notice board on a piece of green space in Badbury Park, they've got nothing that they can do for residents. So that is a bizarre way. They can't suddenly start taking over the parks or anything like that. So the way it's been set up. So I think there is a further meeting involving perhaps how parishes work with management companies who work with developers. We can't go back and sort out the issues with Section 106 because they've done deals. But what is still yet to be delivered as an incentive, perhaps for a number of council as a learning exercise, should look at those Section 106 agreements and whether or not they can be considered sort of fairer or dealt with in a different way without disadvantaging the borough financially. Thank you.
Any questions in that?
There were lots of questions in that. In terms of phasing, so phasing is a question. The contact and the liaison between management companies and residents and developers and residents needs to be resolved. And then, as an action going forward, it was saying that basically we need to have a wider conversation about Section 106 agreements and a communications exercise, which the developers really should be doing, as well as the council, as to why people are paying a service charge and parish precept.
There's still quite a lot to cover in that, so I'll go to each company for the best way to answer that. I don't think this related is why would people pay service charges to a management company when the areas have yet to be adopted? It's kind of part of that as well. Start with Rex.
If nothing's been handed over to the management company, the cost will come to the developer. So we carry out all the maintenance. Once it gets transferred over to the management company or to the managing agent who will scrutinise the handover process, that's when the charges will start to be. But that is, at that point in time, there are amenities and facilities for residents to use. So.
Same goes for district. Yeah, and I've had it with from the management agents we use. They've said this area is not ready for it yet. So generally, we've got to go back to our landscapers, get work improved. But I suppose partly it comes down to the fact that we are developers. We're not landscape managers. So we are in that function after managing agent carry that on our behalf. The residents are getting the benefit of the finance practice.
Simon?
Yeah, I think I'll say it's the same as the advice that if we take on first payment on, completion, that sits with us until then it's actually something we use. So that's covered in the same way. Just on like the phasing of things. So again, it's led generally by the 106 or phasing plan through planning commission. So there is a stipulation of the player by 100 occupation or 50%. That's what we comply to. And generally, from our perspective, that's what residents told as well. We stick to our planning applications and work through it that way.
Councillor Butcher.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. First off, thank you, everyone. You've actually answered quite a number of my questions already, so you're glad I don't have too much. First off, it was mentioned earlier about management agents and the Section 106 agreements that have been drawn up. You mentioned in other areas, I'm assuming the towns, etc., outside of Swindon, where the parishes, district councils, etc., tend to have first right of refusal by the sounds of it as to taking over those services. Considering the predominance of management companies within Swindon development specifically, is it then a fair summary based on what you said that it's been a flaw in those Section 106 agreements that have been drawn up previously in Swindon to not favour a handover directly to parishes or district councils? Well, I don't expect you to obviously know the details of every Section 106 agreement you may have. Based on the things you said there, would you consider that sort of a general assessment of that?
Not necessarily commenting too much on being a flaw in the past all the time. In terms of going forward, that's the way I think we're suggesting to deal with it. It's stipulated in Section 160. It needs to be sort of embedded in the process so early on in the planning process, even before you've started drafting Section 160, it needs to be agreed so that it can flow through the process properly.
One thing that occurred to me earlier was we had some developments where, yes, there's going to be we're transferring the land to the local authority, but we still have managing agents because there's areas that are neither optimal nor public open space, which still need to be managed in terms of private parking areas, etc. So there's the need for managing agents for that until such times as, again, we feel we can transfer the title to the management company and then I just the process kicks in, a VGM and responsibility being taken to find the man for the resident.
Chris?
Realise it, yeah, nothing further than that from us.
That's disadvantage as well. You also mentioned earlier in your statements around developers not management agents, and that your preference is that you don't want to be managing the parcels of land long term. We talked a lot as well about what can be done to speed up the process. But I guess my question is, is there a commitment from you guys, or what more can be done to improve that relationship in terms of how that handover process works efficiently and quickly after residents are moving in? I think it's fair to say the general feeling with new build estates is that people move in, there's an expectation of management. Sometimes management companies aren't taking those things over quickly enough, and there's that sort of void left as to who is actually managing those things, all while residents are suffering effectively by not having those services well maintained. So to say, is there more that can be done to speed up that handover process? Is there any commitment you guys can give as developers to sort of help that?
I think it's in everyone's best interest to hand it over, but I think the bits that we've been alluding to is handing over in the right way, and what is that? There isn't a formal process, and each managing agent may take it differently. So I think for us to take away is to make sure that it's handed over correctly, as quickly as possible, but then I think that's the best thing.
Councillor Butcher.
I think it's in everyone's best interest to hand it over, but I think the bits that we've been alluding to is handing over in the right way, and what is that? There isn't a formal process, and each managing agent may take it differently. So I think for us to take away is to make sure that it's handed over correctly, as quickly as possible, but then
I think also depends on the size of the scheme. So in a very large development, it is, unless you have a phasing plan up front, which everybody's satisfied to, then that's one thing. But smaller schemes are not that much easier to get done and hand them over and set up. The size does make a big difference.
And just adding to what's been said there, I think the I'm here and here is communication. Just to back to the residents involved. Perhaps explaining what some delay may be, whether they're in our control or not. Just echoing, I think, from all three parties here, that it is in our interest to get these sites transferred and handed over as quickly as we can. It may not always look that way, of course, and the communication is improved.
Yeah, I think we agree. Yeah, we do follow a process like the advisor said. There is a process that with the management. It does vary. The management company, but we do a walk around. We look at the areas that are handed over. Generally, there is a snag list. Yeah, we put this right, and that's how the process. Yeah, we do that. But yeah, there's no communications.
Just to push you a bit further on that, then, what would actually address the situation? So we know it's quite common. It could be 5, 6, 10 years plus after the last house has been moved into, that you're still going through adoption processes. Why do you think that is? Because obviously it's in your interest to hand off and keep the site. Is it down to capacity? Is it start changing the council? Is it changing standards? The above? What would actually sort out the problem moving forward? Rather than trying to skirt around it or anything. What would actually, put you on the spot, what would actually sort it out?
Anything in the world, it's just that the local authorities open their arms and willingly adopt everything smoothly and quickly without too many, without unforeseen or unknown committed sums. That'd be the easiest, quickest answer for us.
Why do you think that happens at the moment?
It's the council giving the budget and resources that correct.
Okay. History?
Yeah, on the template, I agree with what Ken just said there. The hidden costs of per developers. If something is known up front, particularly liabilities and that sort of stuff, it's accountable. I think changes of resource can be an issue in the way through the schemes, whether it's highways, whether it's POSs. Between three parties here where personnel have changed. We know it's not going to happen, but when you do get new ideas and new snags that come into it, that can cause delays and additional time and financial costs to get something as well.
Yeah, both those things, and then to add to that, just engagement with, if there was an engineer resource internally at local authority that could support the changes quickly. Waiting for feedback can take 3 months at a time. Every time that the new inquiry goes back and forth, how to finalise and state what the final technical approval looks like, that can be a very long process. If we can speed that up, it would help us.
Thank you. Adams, Hopkins, and then Wilson. Annie.
Thank you, Chair. You stole my question there, but thank you very much. I do have some more questions though, but it's my experience with, I've had 3 developments in recent years built in my wards. It's one of the most heavily developed wards over the last few years, in fact. But my experience is that once the last home is sold, essentially any point of contact on the site is removed, leaving, and that's before the estate's anywhere near completion. I'm talking about the last house is sold. Generally, the point of contact on the site is removed. I understand it's because they're usually based in the sales offices. So this generally leaves residents, certainly in my experience, just through a generic helpline. This generic helpline is usually answered by a generic person, or at least presented as a generic person. So there doesn't seem to be any regular point of contact for residents to be able to talk to, and it leaves them often feeling that their questions aren't being correctly listened to. There's no continuity, because often they have to email again because the case has been closed, another person picks it up, they don't know the history of the case. Would it not be beneficial to residents to have a named person who is readily available? Maybe not on site, I understand the costs involved in that, but certainly available to residents so they're not left just searching the internet for a generic email address or phone contact.
So our last residents, everyone's a 2-year warranty, so they have a direct point of contact with a customer care member, customer relationships manager. But on top of that, where we've got, if it's more statewide issues, obviously we have managing agents who we liaise with directly, so that should filter through the managing agent and then come to us as a developer. And we engage regularly with all our managing agents. We've got a select panel, so we built our relationship with them, so they should filter through managing agents. And then on top of that, in some, not all developments, but we also have shadow boards to, whilst we can't get adoption finalised and developers are the directors of the management company, we appreciate we're not as close to the development as the people living there. So we form a shadow board of residents who will likely take over the RMC at the end of the development, but we liaise with them regularly as well to help feed back information. It's where we found best to communicate, but that's different examples of what we do across different developments.
Just exactly the same. So the individual residents will have direct contact to customer services in the initial 2-year period. Within that contact, individual will also have our collections manager who deals with the, depending on the nature of the query, deals with the adoption-based queries, either through managing agents directly or directly through customer contractors and developers. But customer care is generally our front face, if you like, with the contact at the time. I think putting a representative on the site, as you alluded to, there is, the some sites have more issues than others, and it doesn't necessarily set itself up readily for a permanent member of staff on the site. That said, within the customer services team, the customer services manager allocated that probably only has 2 or 3 sites allocated to them as individuals, so they will be, I think, a fairly well-known face around the residents as necessary.
Yeah, I'm really got on to that because the same that's a really sitting people on top of that, we would have the adoptions manager actively involved, we would have the construction manager, the contracts manager, before hands over again. Most of the residents will know that person quite well from their process previously. So.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the topic of shadow boards, kind of best practice in many ways. I'm trying very difficult not to kind of put my own thoughts on this, be even-handed as chair. But obviously there are developments across the town where the last house hasn't been moved into, that's been a number of years, and those shadow boards aren't set up. So why would you not progress those kind of aspects ahead of handing over? And if you have any estates that are completed, are you happy to make a commitment process tonight that you'll work with members and the residents in those estates to set one up by the end of the year?
For us, we find them really helpful. So that's the aim at the end of it, to hand the development over to residents. If we've got an engaged group of residents early on in the process, it does tend to help.
That's something that's foreign to my experience, but I'm happy to take away and discuss it back at the office with our team.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, with the same history, we haven't done it previously. Probably a case by case, depending on the size of it.
Councillor Hopkins.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little concerned because we've had some reference to Section 106 agreements which are drawn up by planning, and yet we don't have a planning representative here to actually answer any questions about how that comes about, which does leave a slight gap. I think one of the other issues that I have is that when we look at responsibility for, there's some time in the past, decisions must have been taken that new developments would not be adopted by the borough, and that we would include within the Section 106 agreements clauses that actually led to a lot of these developments coming under the auspices of management companies. And that has actually created a system of almost double taxation for a lot of residents. They're paying their council tax like everybody else. They're paying their parish precept like anybody else. But they're also sometimes paying one or even two separate items for management charges. Sometimes they're paying a management charge in relation to the public open space, and sometimes if it's private development, so in other words, the roads themselves have not been adopted, they're sometimes paying yet another management charge for that. And there are, a clear example of that is within Badbury Park. One of the things I'm particularly concerned about, and this is where the questions come in, it's interesting to see the developers say that they are that they're not landscapers. They're not managing agents. They're not landscapers, but actually, in a lot of cases, they have designed the open space. Sometimes there are issues in terms of that design that can lead to long-term problems. And I'm talking specifically that with the climate that we've got now, there is a requirement for SUDs, sustainable urban drainage systems, or swales on lots of developments. And these actually incur lots of cost. And in some cases, the responsibility of that is either unclear or it's left with a management company. Now, I certainly know in respect of Badbury Park that there may have been an opportunity at some stage to have the SUDs adopted by Thames Water, but that is no longer possible, or if it is, it would require a payment to Thames Water for that actually being taken on in the longer term. So I'd be interested to understand from the developers what their approach has been to the issue of SUDs, bearing in mind that there are interactions with highways, because very often drainage comes off highways into the SUDs, and also the aspect that does it seem fair to them that the actual financial responsibility long term, which could be quite substantial, falls upon residents rather than a corporate body like the developer or like Thames Water or like Swindon Borough Council? I'd just be interested to see how they feel about that.
Thank you. I'll start with Priscilla on those points. I'll just make the aspect to the member. I think this is the first time we've ever had this topic here in council, literally in the last 20 years I've been involved. So that's one of the reasons we're coming tonight, is to find out what are the issues and where we want to focus our discussions next. So is that the Priscilla?
Yeah, I mean, the drainage standards have changed fairly recently. So no longer working to super adoption, working to DCG. There is a indication in there that such should be adopted, adoption, but I do know that Thames are resistant to that, and that's obviously what you're alluding to. Yeah, we would, again, if we can get it adopted by Thames or a water authority, or that may be, we would do it. Ultimately, we can't get adopted by them. The only alternative for us is to go to that.
We support that response. I think the other water authorities in my parish say we're trying to exactly the same. The adoption responsibility that they perceive stops it everything to slightly into the pond. It becomes almost like a no man's land. We end up number of schemes, whether it's highway drainage going into it or otherwise, that have to go to the main curve because there does no other mechanism for future adoption of it. I don't know. As an authority, whether you want to look at that from a highways perspective, it would certainly help us as developers, because we do all fully support the design changes that are coming through on service water in particular. Keen to adopt the principles that give the sites security, if you like, going forward.
I think there's much more to add apart from we'd like to get you adopted.
Thanks. Councillor Hopkins, and it looks like Councillor Adams wants to interject on this point.
So thank you for the response there, and I do urge everybody to focus on trying to get that responsibility for the sites, which could be a quite significant cost in years to come, actually taken on board by Thames Water, who to me is the appropriate authority for taking that responsibility. One of the other concerns I have, and I'm referring to Badbury Park, and you may not have the answer in relation to it, but I wasn't around at the time, but not even in Swindon at the time, but Badbury Park was actually constructed after the initial planning application had been turned down by Swindon Borough Council, so it's taken to appeal to the inspector. And as a result, when it came to the actual planning control over the development, very little was left to the control of Swindon Borough Council, as I understand it. And I might or might not be wrong on that, but that's my understanding. And I'm interested to understand why the manual for streets was not used in terms of the design of the roads, because we have buses coming down Biddeston, which is 1 metre narrower than it needed to be under manual for streets to carry buses, coming to a very difficult corner on Homington, and when it turns into Homington, surprise, surprise, Homington is 0.5 metre narrower than it should be under manual for streets. That's my understanding. So I wonder why, from a development point of view, recognising that planning consent came through the inspector and therefore there was an element more freedom, that the standards that were applied were not appropriate to the nature of the development.
Appreciate that's going to be really difficult to talk to as a topic. I guess it's.
I'm quite happy to have an answer in writing at a later stage, Chair.
Should we kind of park that, if that's okay, move on to the next person? Thank you. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to our guests for attending this meeting tonight. First of all, I would like to echo Councillor Hopkins' views. I think it would have been really useful to have planning authority representation here tonight, just to balance it, because it seems section 106 seems to be the root cause. But I welcome that we're having this discussion tonight. That's correct. So I represent a ward that it's, I would say, mature, and there's no more space to go. So all the areas have been built, and the newest development is more than 25 years old. So you would have thought, or you would have assumed that more than 25 years is long enough to resolve any transfer issues, but that's still not the case. There are still areas that have been handed over, and I just can't get any progress. So I was just wondering, because at some point one of you said that what your aim to is to hand over good quality open spaces and play areas. So for example, our play area that's deteriorated, is no longer usable, falling apart, it's heavily overgrown. So at this point, it wouldn't be something that would be handed over in a good quality. So from your point of view, what I really want to understand is, when it comes to these old cases, what is your internal process? Do you prioritize them? Do you still aim to hand them over, or you just focus on your next development? So what just happened with these old cases? It would be helpful. Thank you.
I don't think I have an example of that. Oh, but we have, again, if you just want to hear our internal process, we have meetings currently where we run through every single site that hasn't yet been handed over, every step that needs to happen to have it handed over, and what the action is and who's logging them. I think there's a cost to every single development we have that isn't handed over, so from the internal process we have to manage those costs, and again, hence why the aim is to get handed over as quickly as possible. So yeah, we talk about them every single regularly, but every single one I talk about every quarter, but someone talks about more.
The industry which is something we have, I would say, roughly quarterly. We go through what we call legacy, go through some of the old schemes. I would be being honest with you, we have one or two schemes that do come out and revert, but, you know, for whatever reason, language, whatever it may be, have not followed through that are news to us. So there are some schemes we don't know about. District bonus and is relatively old. We pick those up and we will deal with those. The particular example you're talking about in terms of developments. Have a take on issues on legacy sites that we still control. Is that they are looked into, they're not hidden away.
Just we'll go to what do you class as a legacy site?
It's difficult to put an exact description to it, but for us, legacy is something that's finished. The roads and sewers may or may not be adopted, but you might have an incidental piece of open space left over. So yeah, I mean, if I was to put a rough age on it, 10 years old or something like that. Or older.
Councillor Wilson, Anderson.
Thank you. So could I use this opportunity maybe to take this issue offline? Because it is a legacy issue that it's been outstanding for a very long time. Would it be appropriate? Yeah.
Yes, I'm making notes to go along,
Thank you.
potential recommendations and summaries, so it's on the list.
I was just going to say that we've had a reconciling policy, continuing to try and handle what we can. What area is your water?
Can I can help you. I'm more than happy to help you. So if you want to make contact afterwards.
Thank you. Just developing that point further, there used to be a developers forum in the town which was much more focused on development before planning was approved, but we don't have any similar mechanism post planning. Would it be useful from your perspective to have a single forum or mechanism to engage the council and members on legacy sites, to kind of get them escalated, to see progress made sooner rather than later?
I think, yes, it's a short answer, but I think it's, if you're going to have a developers forum, generally covering other things like planning or all aspects related to development and making all that work. In principle, yes, covering legacy and adoption. Parts of it.
Agreed. Thank you. I think that's what we'll kind of talk about as a committee after this, is about how best to take it forward. And it's one of the reasons that we don't have and obviously today from the planning side is there's so much for us to explore where we want to kind of play it down. It's also that we can't trade matters that are raised to the committee, and it may be a recommendation to them to review things and whatnot, but that's kind of, let's see how it goes. Councillor Lynn is next.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say about, again, what Councillor Wilson and Councillor Hopkins has said. I mean, it would have been better if we had a planning officer with us today, and a lot of them are related to section 106 and planning related matters. And my wider question is pretty much to Councillor Wilson. I mean, from the customer's point of view, I think customer wants to get the service. They shouldn't be chasing who's responsible and who's not responsible. And I'm going to give an example of school sites actually. One of them is the Promise Support Me. And that's the New College site. And I know obviously the site was owned by New College, but developed by Trust Nicholson. And I know there's a few how the management agent, one of them is Astra and another one is, I'm not sure. But it's probably a development which is about 30, 35 years old. And my understanding is only about 4 or 5 years ago, the roads have been adopted by the borough. But while the road has been adopted, but there are still certain services nobody knows who is responsible for. And it's not a big site, I'm talking a small site. I mean, nobody is willing to take responsibility. So it's the overgrown hedges, the overgrown grasses in a particular site. And from the resident point of view, we've contacted the council, we've contacted our housing association, but So they are saying it's their responsibility, and the council is saying it's no, it's their responsibility. And as I say, from the resident point of view, is look, we are paying council tax. We haven't got the time to go to the council, nor do we have got the time to go to the developers. We just want to see our services valued. And as I say, this is a site which is about 30, 40 years old, and nobody is taking responsibility. As a result, the residents are suffering. They feel that they've got so much overgrown hedges and grasses and trees. This particular bit is probably about 2 acres of land. It's not being maintained. A similar one, Chairman, is in Old Road. Again, that site is probably about 40 years old when it was developed and a housing association took over. Now, some of them are owned by private owners now because it's been sold to private ownerships. But as far as I understand, even the housing association do not know whether they control certain areas of the parking spaces for the residents. Again, it's something which I'm dealing with, but I'm not getting anywhere. So it does seem, even though it could be developed by technically, or sold over to another developer, but they don't know what they're taking over. And it's the residents who are being punished.
In those instances, on land registry, it'll say who the ownership is within, and then that should enable to track back those responsibilities.
Yeah, but it's not their land. From their point of view, it's not taking my house. It's affecting the land which is opposite me. But I want to see this particular land maintained. And they haven't got the time to go to the land registry who owns the owner of the land. So that I say, there's three stakeholders: the council, the college, and the president. None of them are taking responsibility.
Councillor, again, just pick up the language, but we can't fix individual cases tonight, but Community Services made a note, we'll make sure it's followed up afterwards. Okay. Councillor Evans.
Hi, so thank you, Chair. This is certainly a border issue around the town, and we actually touched on this earlier. It's already been established that if a development was to be taken over by Swindon Borough Council, the developers would be paying for the maintenance of this land up until a point it's adopted by Swindon Borough Council. But if it's being adopted by a management company, that management company will be charging a fee to residents. The issue arises in how developers seem to treat the Swindon Borough Council versus residents and a management company. Management companies seem to start charging residents 6, 7 years in the instance of some of my developments before a scheme is even adopted. Whereas if that same scheme had been planned to be adopted by SBC, developers would have been paying that sum the entire time. And this is where the frustration comes for residents. They seem to, they're quite rightly, in many people's opinion, felt like they're being shaken down for money, essentially, because this is they've been treated distinctively different between Swindon Borough Council adopting land or management company adopting land. If the latter had been chosen, the developers would be covering the costs for those 7 years versus them having to cover the costs through the management fees through those 7 years. So essentially, why is the question essentially is why are those two different options presented, and why in one case are developers choosing to pay the money, and in the other case are they forcing residents to pay money?
Residents have use of the open space and it's well maintained. Does it not feel right that there should be a charge for that? So it's not that residents would get charged if there's no use of amenity. So from a developer's point of view, I guess why should we pay for 6 years worth of maintenance when residents have good use of that space?
I would come back on that and say that if Swindon Borough Council was adopting the land, you would be paying that regardless, even if residents are using that land. The only difference here is Swindon Borough Council aren't adopting the land, management companies are. So in the scenario where Swindon Borough Council was adopting that land, for those 7 years, people are using that open space, but are not having to pay for it. But when it's a management company taking over the land, they are then spending those 7 years paying for that land despite it not being adopted. That would be my response to that. There's a distinct difference. They are, in both those examples, they are using the land. In one example, they are not paying for it because Swindon Borough Council hasn't adopted it. And in the other example, they are paying for it because a management company has been put in place who have, admittedly, these residents have signed an agreement to say that they'll pay those charges. But, you know, there's a distinct difference.
That's correct. Stepping on this one. I know where Councillor Adams is trying to come from because he's talking about an example that I know well. I guess it's the fact that it's not the residents' responsibility when it comes to the management code, it's still sitting with the directors appointed by the developers. So for those 5 or 6 years plus, it's still very much seen as the developers' responsibility. They're not getting engagement from the management code because there isn't a shadow board or there's nothing kind of engagement-wise like that. What do you regard as best practice, and in your respective companies, how have we kind of moved forward from tonight in a positive foot of trying to resolve some of these legacy sites? Starting off with Crest, I quite like what you were saying.
I think it does all come back to communication. I think we've talked about that quite a lot. And if we can update where there are large sites for 6, 7 years, I think it's right that the residents upfront when they buy the property are told what they're expected to pay, what they get for it. And along that journey, the developer sticks to those obligations set out in the 106, and we update residents regularly. So I think that's the way we know we need to improve on, and that's something that we're working on internally very hard at the moment. But I think what still stands about if residents, if it's a management company, they know that at point of sale, and they have a development that's landscaped and is maintained accordingly.
Industry?
From a slightly different point of view, if we as a developer know that on that particular development we're going to place Swindon Borough Council a certain amount of money, that can go into the cost plan for that development, which may then affect the requested sales price. So in that sense, the residents are just paying it through a different route.
Exactly. So I wouldn't necessarily, let's say it affects the sales price, it's more potentially affects the viability, and you could be looking at viability assessment of the application, change the full housing provisions and things like that, but it amounts to the same thing that probably was saying, it still affects. It's about knowing early what costs are so that people can plan for them.
So just touching back on still some of your comments around phasing of options, would there not be a route in which the management companies could be handed on to the residents earlier or in some kind of phased approach rather than at the very end? So we don't get a scenario of 5 years plus and the management companies are still not getting out engagement with residents.
I think it's case by case, like we say, that yeah, if you've got 1,000 units, £1,000, then yeah, that probably is the case. It needs to be phased in the areas of POS and just go through. If you're talking the site of 100 houses, then probably is one hand over once at the end.
So exactly, depending on the nature of the scheme, the extent of the POS as well. We've got a number of sites where there may not be 1,000 units, but there's a significant amount of POS on it, just depending on the nature of the scheme. So yeah, we would look at phasing wherever we can.
I think your question was relating to the residents having control of the management company, whereas a 1,000 unit scheme, that's where we wish is the answer, whether there's a way you can break each phase up into a separate scheme that's managed by one management company. So that's where the challenge would lie. We complete each phase separately, but it's the spine road predominantly, I'm sure most complaints come about, because that's the final bit and the heaviest relationship we have with highways with snagging, etc., and getting that handed over. That's the final step for us. I think my colleague to the right's already discussed that we can't transfer all the land until we know exactly what needs to be done, because if we transfer the land to the residents and then we need it back, obviously that's another challenge and we can never get the development.
Nigel, and then Councillor Sutton.
So I think we need to think about the expectations set with the customer. So when a customer buys a house, they are told there's going to be a management company, they're going to be paying a service charge fee. They leave that sales office on the assumption that they're going to pay it once it goes into management and they have control of the management company. If someone said to them that they would start paying a service charge fee halfway through and they would have no control over that fee, most of them would walk away.
Yes.
All right, so that's the honest truth of it. And the reason why developers do it is because they've got control.
Just be careful what you kind of say, please.
Well, they've got control of the management company, and it's about money. It's as simple as that.
The residents, if they carefully read their transfer document advised by the solicitor, it's clear now that we'll be paying it from earlier when everything's finished.
I think it's
Because it
important.
talks about managing agent, what is we have for the map.
Regulations have changed in recent years as well, with new homes policy code, and it is set out even clearer, and we set out a schedule for the next 5, maybe even 10 years, what that fee would be expected to be. That's within the last 2 years, so that's something that's changed in the last 2 years.
Thank you. I see the gentleman at the back with his hand up. I'm afraid there's not time for other questions or points to be made. If there's anything specific, we can raise it with consensus outside. Linked to that though, disputes between residents, management companies and developers. How do you kind of approach that kind of topic so it doesn't become a burning thing in estates and bad blood between developers and reputation and the residents? Do you find that that's an issue, or how do you approach that kind of thing from an escalation?
Probably initially gets raised for our customer care, and then depending on the issues, severity, etc., it will get allocated to a high level or to a engagement elsewhere. Yeah, again, it's case by case, but yeah, that's ultimately the way we go. Yeah, initially with customer care and then escalate to the various department teams, whatever the company needs to be involved.
Mr.
Customer care is the first call, absolutely. I'm trying to think of examples of the best example really is people's perception that a contractor, a landscape contractor, for example, is not maintained to a standard that gets raised in, come through, and it'll get investigated, get a look at it. If that is deemed or agreed or upheld, then we have our excuse me, we have our relationships with money agents that pick that up. We'll either get another company involved and remove the company that's not performing, or it comes in the first book to customer service. Yeah.
Yes, a similar process. It starts with the customer service team. We've got weekly meetings that involve other departments, our commercial department, technical department, that anything that's the state wide we bring to. And a lot of them can get closed out really quickly, but other ones that are more long-standing will get escalated to usually have a director in charge of it, who's the director of the management company, and they'll oversee the issue.
Thank you. Looking at the room for members wishing to ask anything else, Councillor Sandler.
Thank you. I suppose it's an unusual question in terms of, there was a mention a short while ago about viability. If you've got expensive things on a site to maintain, then that could affect viability. You might provide less affordable housing, for example. But in most cases, this is like long after the horse is bolted. Here we've got some significant sites that are used in villages, some of the larger ones, where it's only once you're going through reserve matters and your developers are discussing, negotiating, liaising with the borough over flood attenuation features, for example. So one of the biggest sites in used villages has got to be raised up by 0.75 metre. Across the site, 2,500 homes. It's a smaller site over there that's got to be raised by a metre. So you've got some significant flood attenuation features. Section 106 has all been negotiated. Your affordable housing levels have been set. The people picking up the costs, the long-term costs, are the residents who will be paying the management company in the future. My question is about the transparency, because obviously at the early days, you aren't doing much more than replacing dead planting, the odd tree here and there, some minor maintenance of those attenuation features. This is what we're seeing in Redlands Grove. but the significant costs are 10, 15 years down the line. So I'm asking you as a question saying very helpfully that residents are given a projection of potential service charges for 5 years ahead. But the significant costs come, because your sites may not involve these features, but some of the significant costs come 10, 15 years down the road. Is that factored in at the outset, in terms of the transparency with buyers at day one, given, say, a 25-year life cycle, they're just taking out a 25-year mortgage?
Yeah, I think we again project our 10 years. I think it's part of the DBS policy that we do it for 10 years, so all our projections include that 10 years. And yeah, in every case, if there's a certain feature that's included in that management company, there'll be an allowance for just the general maintenance, for the yearly maintenance, and then also a fund, a pot that builds to deal with these the longer term things. And that's desilting ponds or replacement head. There's a pot that builds there to deal with those issues, and that's very similar with in players and things like that. There's a yearly fee, and there's also a fund that builds for final replacement of all the equipment at the 25 years, 50 years time. So yeah, that's what's covered off.
Exactly the same from the perspective.
The same, not yours.
Thank you.
Other members? Okay, well, we've had around 45, so it's a good time to go through this. I've got a couple of final questions to ask, and we can kind of look to see if we can summarise and see where we go next. In terms of each of the companies involved, what would an ideal target be to say, if we were to come around and say, what would it take to see new estates adopted within 2 years? So we don't have an ongoing conversation about existing sites. What would it really take, other than to say it's technical approval and phasing? From your side, what would it take to proactively get to that point, if not sooner? And whether it's incentives but what comes to mind about how we work as a local authority with developers to get ourselves in that place, so we aren't talking of legacy sites. Starting off with,
I think, yeah, this is quite a broad question, but I think an openness to phasing, if we're going to go down the route, parish adoption, that sort of things, yeah, there's an openness to a phasing, rather than just say, you've got to get everything to go around from hands at once. Yeah, that would definitely help.
I think the section 38, section 104 will come into this part of the discussion as well. I think being careful now, so there's a sort of willingness to pursue the adoption. The technical group is one aspect, as you mentioned. Legal agreement obviously is another aspect that can drag out over time, certainly with the number of bodies and getting them yourself. But yeah, willingness to support the adoption from the developer and also from the local authority would be very welcome.
Yeah, I think echo all that. I think 104s are causing us a bigger issue as well when we're trying to get drainage adopted. And again, it's another thing to be snagged, another thing to us to go and rectify, which is extremely disruptive to the residents because we have to dig down the roads and then adoptions and some of those standards, as in what was fine one day is now changing regularly as well. So again, just trying to change the authority as well.
Just to add to that, sorry, the process sequence, if you like, needs to be pursued as going forward as typical. There are mechanisms where we can differently. We've got 1 or 2 sites going through the moment. Different mechanisms that some is just in the neighbourhood. Occasionally, we focus on getting the civil works done, the road works done, or a different set of standards. So it can impact on the residents adversely for. Yeah, from any developer's perspective, to try and push it.
so to your hand up, I'm afraid we can't do any public policy.
You have discretion, and it is a scrutiny meeting. I'd like to correct the record. I'm asking you to scrutinise.
I'm afraid not on this.
No, thank you.
Any points looking around? Right.
So we haven't really talked about potential new ways of working, in my opinion. So I think it's sort of old school thinking about house building. And I think we need to start thinking about community creation because it's more resident focused. If you change that mindset, residents become the centre of creating communities and the local community is part of that. And we move away from the developers running everything in terms of building estates. And that then actually allows a far better buy-in from residents and the local community to ensuring we've got visibility of what is going on an estate. Our residents first has come up with a method, community creation method. I suggest we don't go through it now. I can circulate it for information because I think Swindon Borough Council would actually benefit from that.
So thank you for that. I do think that's unfair characteristic of our conversation tonight, where we have tried to get into what those root causes are and how to move forward. There's obviously a lot to unpack as we kind of go through this, and I think this will be the end of it tonight. So points I've kind of got as we've been discussing. So thank you for the life cycle of development. I think it was helpful to kind of bring some of these conversation points. To go into it in more depth, we don't normally do them as a committee, but rather have another evening in front of everybody. Are you happy that we look at a task and finish group of interested members to report to the next meeting to allow in-depth officer discussion to take place in some of the key points that we've talked through tonight? Particularly in open forum, it's quite difficult to have those kind of conversations. The key areas I've kind of got are the technical approval approach, phasing and thirges, capacity, staff changes, and when the standards themselves change and working with developers. There's something around reviewing Section 106 our approach and how clear we are in the adoption process. There's something on responsibility of studs, particularly with Thames Water and other related parts. And then I do like the idea of having this kind of legacy adoption forum, new developments forum as a single place where we can hold the council and developers to account and members to raise concerns. Hopefully, in the spirit of what we're talking about, that's the kind of thing that we could do without being fully bureaucratic. So that's kind of my key recommendation out of this, is we kind of agree that's the task group. I've got a couple of other points after that, but what the members think was that as an approach to take forward.
I certainly think that's worth following. And I think when we talk about a legacy adoption forum, I don't think it's just about holding developers or the council to account. I think it's actually, more importantly, giving feedback on how things have worked. Some things may have worked very well. And I think if developers, and I do believe that most people who do their jobs, whether they're property developers or whether they're council staff, do their best to get it right. And I think if they have the feedback on how things have worked well or not so well on developments, they could take that on board. So I think I'd see it as an opportunity to give feedback on how things have worked. And sometimes, hopefully, they will have worked very well. Sometimes there may have been problems, and at least developers would then be aware of them.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. Yeah, I think task and finish group sounds sensible. So I support that, and I also support the Council of Options, which is saying, I think to create that continuous improvement, because there's growth in Swindon. There's going to be more development, so if we can avoid having these issues in the future, I think that would be in the interest of every party, all of us at a time. To have like a library of lessons learned, knowing what would be benefit of all of us. Thank you.
It looks like we've kind of got, that's part one that I should propose. The next one is to note the agreement of Crest History and Swindon to consider shadow boards of management companies on sites where 100% houses have been moved into, and hopefully to report back on progress. 3 would be to note agreement to meet with relevant board councillors to discuss adoption and management company issues. So we can kind of take that point out of the room. to thank our attendees, because it really is quite appreciated your attendance tonight to go through this. And a final point for me was if there are outstanding issues in your respective developments, which the council can assist with or should be prioritising, please could you notify community services, and we will see what we can do in terms of escalations and kind of try and see how we do progress those. Obviously, anybody who's attended tonight hasn't had the opportunity, but they have been able to come along. So if there is anything outstanding, please do kind of at least let us know what you consider those issues are. So when we have our task group meeting, we can kind of see what the situation is from the developers. Members happy on those additional 3 points?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. So with that said, I shan't repeat it, but it is recorded and community services are making notes, and I've got my own notes. So it's the task and finish group. It's to thank our attendees tonight, to no agreement around the shadow boards, and to meet with ward councillors. I think other things around parishes with management companies and communication with members will kind of take outside the room with ourselves as members after that task and finish.
Chair, may I make an observation in terms of the legacy board? And it would be my recommendation that the agreement is that you consider and explore how they may be brought into effect, rather than an agreement that they will be brought into effect in this meeting.
Well, I think that's what the task and finish group will do, is now work with officers in more depth on those particular areas to see what's workable, what's not, and to report back at the next meeting to see if there is something here. If there is, and all being well, we'll get the recommendation to the cabinet, planning committee, wherever is most appropriate for them, so we make progress. All those in favour, please indicate. Thank you, unanimous. Much appreciated. So that said, thank you for that. That's the main topic for tonight. Everyone's welcome to stay for the last 5-10 minutes, or you're welcome to step back now. I'll give people a moment to decide. If not, we'll move on to the next item. Okay, so next item is the work programme. Very much for the next couple of meetings. So just bring that up. It was provisional. The last conversation in the quarterly session that we had with committee chairs and vice chairs. Councillor Davis would like us to talk about the outturn budget report for September. We've got the standard annual report of Scrutiny, which is very straightforward, takes a few minutes, and we've got the Armed Forces Covenant coming back, which is to explore further collaboration and feedback based on the last 2 years ago. Ms. Franks.
Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know, that's going to be discussed in the next all colleagues call. Work has commenced on it, but it was too late really to update the agenda.
Here's the outstanding points rather than the work programme. But are members happy to keep that as the 8th of September on those 3 topics, or are there other things that we should kind of pursue or look into at this time?
There's a couple of things. Sorry, Chair. One is that we previously had a report on the Section 19 flood report, and we've got nothing in the advanced work programme to follow up where that's gone to. Obviously, that affected people across the borough, so I would suggest that if it's possible to include that as an update item, I think it would be useful for residents, for councillors. And just going forward, a couple of meetings, we've got the kind of half-yearly report from the Legal Council in December, and then the final report 3 months later in March.
Whether that, I mean, if the half year figure, if the half year time is October, we can have a meeting in October, would that be better coming to the November meeting?
Thoughts, Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Sumner on that. I think as well on the other issue in terms of the flood issues, I would suggest that we liaise with officers and the cabinet member to see where it's got to, so they can come to the earliest appropriate meeting. So I don't know when that is, but they will know.
Sorry, just on that point, the only thing I'm ever so slightly nervous about is that with the weather patterns, they tend to repeat each year in quite the same way. So we will head into storm season, October, November. If we're discussing the outcomes or the progress of Section 19 flood report after people have had their homes flooded again, it will look rather embarrassing.
Earliest.
Yes.
I think they're both fair comments. If we're looking at the 8th, therefore we'd have Tassie Finchman reporting back. There's when we talk about when it comes to the our-term budget report. There's the update on the gang report, which won't take very long, and whenever update comes out of the Armed Forces Covenant. It'll be a packed meeting, but I think we can get through that if we keep things to the point and have that as an update on the flood report, subject to the agreement of officers and cabinet members, but that is still 7-8 weeks away, so at the very least we should have an update conversation about that. 17th of November, we've got public transport and dashboard data emissions, which actually came from our vice chair, Councillor Davis. It wasn't from me. I was very happy to support that. I understand that the chief exec is also happy to see what resource we can apply to that aspect. Bearing in mind that is only 2 items, that would also seem appropriate to bring forward the leaders' report. So I think it's a very fair comment. We're kind of happy with that comment. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Min.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to public transport, I was wondering if we would possible also cover pathways, because it's one thing looking at public transport via connection, but also if you at the same time look at your cycling pathways, then you can build up the full picture, and you're just not looking at kind of like a one piece of jigsaw.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, in terms of the armed covenant report which you are speaking about, I'm just wondering what that is about. From my understanding is it's been looked at by fairness in the committee and the report was produced and the matter has been resolved.
I'm afraid not. There are a number of issues that came as a result of that report that were noted by the committee and to be investigated further and report back. So that September meeting was to report back on the issues that were identified by the Armed Forces Champion and were presented in front of the committee. In terms of Councillor Wilson's point, it is the will of the committee about how we can approach these things. I'm not ready to do it, so if it's the will of the committee that we include and expand that to include cycling and footpaths, I'm quite open to that. So it's not for me to dictate, it's for the council.
Chair, I would fully support that because I think Councillor Stanker makes a great point. We can't just be looking at the bus routes without realising what the paths are and how we're connecting. So getting the big picture would be much more helpful. So if that was something that completely.
So that takes us to the end of the year. You're quite happy on that basis.
Yep.
Just to make it formal. All those in favour? Okay, unanimous. Item 7 is status request for action and information. Generally, I think everyone's on top of things, but there are still a couple of outstanding plans. Anything that you want to raise now? Escalations? If not, I'll ask us just to note it. Sean?
Sorry, Chair, I think there's an update from Thames Water in Appendix 4, just for members' information.
I think it's just worth to note. No indication to speak on 7, so I've asked us to note, and again, just to indicate your support. On that note, on not quite, bang on 8 o'clock, I should close the meeting. Thank you for your time. I'll see you next time.